Sorry for there not being a video last week. I had a crazy week at work. I said to my boss at the end of the week, I was like, this week took a whole month. I don't know if you have that feeling, but it was like, I literally felt like last week lasted a whole month. It was crazy busy. It was also such nice weather every day, so I wanted to go outside whenever I could. And then at the weekend, we changed my rooms over, which was quite a bit of work. And there was stuff everywhere, so I didn't have the chance to record. So yeah, sorry about that. But today I wanted to do something a little bit different and see whether you guys like this type of content or not, because for years I've been looking into doing something on top of true crime that's not true crime. I love watching a lot of different types of stories. For someone who flies a lot, I watch a lot of air crash investigation documentaries, and they somehow make me feel calmer to fly. Just knowing how a plane works, how the mechanics all work together, and how a plane flies and all that stuff, and knowing how many things in a row typically have to go wrong before a plane crashes just somehow makes me feel calmer when flying. But I know years ago I asked this question if people would be interested in me covering air crash investigation stories, and most people were like no, because we're already afraid of flying. We don't want to get that worse, which I understand. I also love watching caving accidents or cave diving accidents, but the channels I watch, they're usually animated. They make animations, and those stories are hard to tell without animations, without visual aids. It's really hard to explain where people went and how people ended up getting lost and stuff like that when you don't have that visual of the cave. And also I covered one cave story, and a lot of people were like, ooh, I'm out on this. I have way too much claustrophobia for this, which by the way, so do I, but I still somehow like watching them. But another type of video that I like watching, and because I am a big theme park enthusiast, I kind of like watching theme park accident videos. Is a big word, okay? We all like watching true crime, but that doesn't mean that we are celebrating these stories. I want to make that very clear. But there is a science behind why people enjoy watching videos like this. It's as very basics. In a nutshell, it's how we live out our worst fears in a safe space. So, I wanted to do one of those videos today, talk about one of those theme park accidents, and see how it does, and see if you guys like this or not. I won't replace true crime with it, but it's just an extra series I could do on my channel if you guys like watching it or not. Again, not the right word, but you know what I mean. So I'll start off by saying no disrespect to anyone. I think, again, similar to true crime, some of these stories I think just need to be told, and people might not be aware of them. I wasn't aware of a lot of them. So the story I'm going to tell today is probably the most well-known one in the UK anyway, but I know this theme park very well by name. I had never heard of this crash until probably maybe 3 years ago when I watched the first video on it. And that is the crash of the Smiler roller coaster at Alton Towers. So I'm just going to get into it and we'll see how it goes. So on the 2nd of June 2015, Alton Towers theme park in the UK, which is a very big, well-known theme park. You can compare it to something like Six Flags or Busch Gardens or something like that. It's got a pretty good safety record, and it's just a really well-known theme park. It's also the biggest theme park in the UK. A roller coaster train came to an abrupt halt at the top of a hill. So the 16 passengers on board waited, not knowing what was happening. After some time, an announcement played, assuring them that there was nothing wrong and that a minor technical issue is being resolved. And then, without any further announcements, the train just started moving again. And what happened next would change lives forever. So, I'll insert a picture of what the train looks like. It's 4 people next to each other and 4 rows, so 16 people per train. The ride has 5 trains in total, but doesn't run all of them every day, depending on how busy the park is. So to go back, in 2012, Alton Towers announced that it would build a brand new roller coaster for the 2013 season. It would replace a much beloved indoor roller coaster that had actually been closed for several years, and they were going to build a new outdoor roller coaster instead in that space. But further details were kept secret. It was given the name Secret Weapon 7. The marketing tactics Alton Towers used were amazing, really. They kept putting the logo of the ride on like different billboards, and they ran TV ads for the ride. So there was a lot of buzz about the ride. The grand opening of the ride was scheduled for March 2013, but just weeks before, there was a press preview. So both celebrities and people from the press were allowed to ride the roller coaster before it officially opened. And during that time, one of the trains stalled on a lift hill. So the lift hill, again, with the chain, is the thing that pulls the train up, and it got stuck there. And so they all had to be evacuated, and Alton Towers, because of this, had to push back the opening date. Now it ended up opening at the end of May 2013, and the ride was officially named the Smiler. The Smiler had 14 inversions in total, which is to date still the most inversions one roller coaster has in the world. I seriously think I would die on that ride, like, no joke. I used to be such a roller coaster buff. Like, as a teenager and in my 20s, I would ride every roller coaster, loops, backwards, no problem. And as soon as I hit 30, everything that made loops and goes backwards just made me nauseous and gave me really bad headaches, which I think are more of a neck problem. But I still tried to do them every now and then throughout my 30s, but it would just make me feel so nauseous. Like, I've always had this problem. They kind of always instruct you when a roller coaster makes loops and not just loops, inversions, like, the corkscrew turns and stuff like that. They all count. Inversions are essentially when you're hanging upside down, even for a second. And they always instruct you to push your head against the headrest and keep it there. I physically couldn't do that. Every time we made a loop, my head would gravity would just push my head forward and I would be like this the whole loop. And then by the time I got back up, my head would constantly like move left and right and slam into the shoulder restraints that were around me. So I would walk off every roller coaster nauseous and with a really bad headache. So 14 inversions. I think I would throw up on everyone on that ride and seriously just not survive. Like I would be like just throwing up all the time. Like I would be knocking my head constantly and throwing up all the time. Like that's not. I would never ride that roller coaster. I can understand why it's popular with roller coaster enthusiasts, and in my 20s I probably would have loved doing it. I still would love doing it, but I can't anymore. 14. That's a lot. Issues kind of continued to surface. Cars would occasionally stall on a swooping bat wing element of the track. I'll also insert a picture of that so you can see what that looks like, because it's a very important piece of the story. But essentially it kind of looks like a heart. It's like two loops coming together. And on one occasion, 50 riders had to be evacuated from the coaster after a bolt got loose and fell from a track joint, causing a small gap to appear between two track sections. In a separate incident months later, several plastic guide wheels fell from one of the trains, causing minor injuries to 4 riders. Now, Alton Towers noted that these events, though it sounded like a lot, were very much part of opening any new roller coaster, and that's true. Every new roller coaster I've known to be opened at like Disney or Universal, and I always use these as an example because they are the theme parks with quite possibly the biggest safety guidelines in the world. They kind of have the most to lose if something major, like a major accident, happens there. Every new ride has teething issues, and I know that whenever, like Epic Universe, a brand new full theme park that opened at Universal, has several rides down several times during the day because of teething issues. So that's indeed just kind of normal for theme parks when you're opening a new roller coaster. And really, that really seemed to be the case for the Smiler. All of these things happened in 2013, and the 2014 season went well, and the ride established itself as a new favorite among park goers. So on the 2nd of June 2025, it was a very windy day, and some rides in the park were closed because of this. However, the Smiler wasn't affected. Shortly after 1 p.m., a ride operator noticed a fault light on the panel, and they called in engineers. Like, there were riders sitting in one of the trains at the station. They were removed, and engineers had to come in and take a look. So the ride was temporarily closed. Now, all morning, there had been 4 trains riding, and staff took this opportunity of downtime to add a 5th train to the ride, which was the maximum, because it was a busy day. A lot of rides were closed, so a lot of people were flocking to the Smiler, and the wait times were getting really long. So they added a 5th train to reduce wait times for people. So the engineers quickly resolved the fault and sent around an empty train. This failed to engage with the second lift hill about halfway through the track. So they had to manually walk out to the car and push it so it engaged with the lift hill, and then the lift hill pulled it up and it completed the circuit fully. So they sent out a second empty train to make sure that it completed the track fully and that problem didn't happen again. But this empty train stalled on the batwing element, most likely due to a strong gust of wind and the fact that the train was empty and didn't have the normal weight of a lot of people in it. But at this point is where the big miscommunication took place. The engineers that were working on this assumed that there were still only 4 trains in operation because the staff hadn't told them they added a 5th train. So this stalling, like the batwing element, was out of view from the ride operators. The engineers in the meantime were back there too and also couldn't see that there was a train on the tracks. And because they were under the impression there were only 4 and there were 4 trains in the station, they were like, great, it completed the full cycle, good to go. Now there was CCTV cameras in place, but the screens were so small and such bad quality that it was really difficult to see an obstacle on the tracks. So when the engineers gave the all clear, riders were loaded onto a train and it was dispatched onto the tracks. Now the computer system indicated to the operator that the track ahead was occupied, like it stopped the train right when it was supposed to go down the batwing element and indicated that the track was occupied, and an automatic safety system, the train behind then stops. But nobody could figure out why, and engineers just assumed it was a computer glitch and overwrote the computer system and essentially told the computer system to just dispatch the train. And the computer system attempted to do just this. It restarted the loaded train, which plummeted down the loop, entered the batwing, and smashed at full speed into the empty train that was there on the tracks. The 2 cars tangled together, went back and swung back and forth at least a dozen times before completely coming to a stop. Passengers on board had suffered devastating injuries, particularly those sitting in the front row. They made full impact with the empty car. And to make things worse, they were now stuck on a piece of track that was very hard to reach. It was really high off the ground with no clear evacuation points. You know, a lot of, like every ride, including roller coasters, has several areas where there's stairs, and those are meant to be, you know, if the ride gets stuck, cars typically move until one of those areas and then the computer system stops them there so that they can easily get evacuated. But this was an accident, like the computer had no involvement in this, so they were stuck at a section of the ride that didn't have a clear evacuation point. So like the park medical staff immediately arrived, assessed the situation, and realized there was nothing they could do, and they called support immediately, like police, emergency services, and fire department arrived within minutes. But to reach the cart or to reach the train, they had to build a scaffolding that would go up high enough. Several first responders, however, didn't wait for this and climbed up the tracks to reach the train. Against all advice, they were warned to wait until the scaffolding was built. But this is a typical first responder thing. They know there are people hurt up there. They don't want anyone to die just because they had to wait. So they wanted to at least get up there and apply first aid to these people. In total, it took 4.5 hours for all passengers to be freed. Now, all 16 victims injuries were transported by air ambulance. Everyone on board the train sustained injuries. Some were like whiplash, or some internal injuries. The worst had severe leg injuries. 2 riders had to have legs amputated, and others would take months, if not years, to recover. Among the injured were 17-year-old Joe Pugh and 19-year-old Leah Washington. They had been on a first date at the park when the accident happened. The crash caused Joe to have severe knee injuries, and unfortunately, Leah had to have one of her legs amputated. Now, Merlin Entertainments, the parent company of Alton Towers, cooperated fully with the investigation from the start. From the beginning, they offered extensive support to the victims, publicly stating that the victims would want for nothing. When it came to compensation or support, I believe medical support was all covered. The ride and several others in Merlin-owned parks, because they owned several theme parks, were closed, subject to a lengthy investigation. Now, while the direct cause of the crash had been human error, it was also for a big part lack of training and processes. So, the park's engineers, for example, had not been trained to appoint a lead engineer, so there was not one person on site delegating tasks to every person, like you do this, you do that. And there wasn't a leader who would then, do like a final loop, like walk around the tracks to check that everything was okay. They also weren't required to check the logbook of the ride. If they had checked it, they would have seen that a 5th train had been added to the ride. Would that have sprung something in their minds of, oh, we're only seeing 4 trains, where is the 5th? I don't know, but that's sort of the intention, that they would have copped on that there were 5 trains on the tracks and there were only 4 in the station. Additionally, also, engineers were not trained to share information, so because trains had stalled a number of times on this batwing element back in 2013, only the engineers who were working on that problem at the time knew about this. They hadn't shared shared the information. I don't know if they were all still the same engineers, if new engineers had been hired, but the engineers working on the issue that day were not aware that these things had happened and that they needed to really double check that batwing element. And engineers were also unclear about rules around moving trains. There was no formal advice about how many empty trains they should dispatch to complete the full cycle before deciding the ride was safe to reopen. And again, I'm comparing this to Disney and Universal because I'm there every year. When a ride breaks down, it's typically down for at least an hour, and I have seen empty cars or empty trains go around tracks for like half an hour straight before they decide that every niggly problem is no longer there and that the ride is fully safe to reopen. And some engineers had an incorrect understanding of how the Smiler system differed from other ride systems at the park. So all of these procedural problems were compounded by a simple mechanical one. Also, the ride should not have been operating that day because of the strong winds. There were gusts of wind up to 74 kilometers an hour or 46 miles, and the ride was not designed to run in winds any greater than 55 kilometers an hour or 34 miles. And because other rides had already been closed in the park, the Smiler should have been closed, but because it was such a popular ride, they decided to just keep running it. In light of this, Merlin was fined £7.5 million pounds, which was reduced to £5 million because they pleaded guilty. They also cooperated in civil claims against them by the victims and their families. And as I said, I believe they paid for all the medical bills, which doesn't, make right the permanent damage some of these people sustained, but you never learn. Or I'll say it this way, improvements always come too late. They always have to come after an accident, because that's when you know what you were doing wasn't working. Multiple adjustments were made to the ride system and staff were fully retrained. And with these changes complete, the Smiler reopened less than a year after the crash, and it has since gone on to have a clean safety record, and is now a very popular ride at Alton Towers, if not still the most popular ride at Alton Towers. And to end this story on a positive note, Joe Pugh and Leah Washington actually became a couple in the aftermath of the crash, and a few years later got married in a ceremony in Leeds. So that's really nice. So that's the story of the Smiler crash at Alton Towers. Let me know what you guys thought of this. If it's something you're interested in learning more about, I could do one true crime a month and one of these like theme park type videos a month. If you are interested in any other kinds that I haven't thought of, let me know. I am a big fan of Mr. Pollen's channel, which, if you haven't heard of it, look it up, but he's got like millions of subscribers. He tells all sorts of accident and kind of horror stories in story format. He doesn't use a lot of visual aids aside from some pictures here and there, but he tells everything very animated, and does a really good job of telling it. So if you want to hear stories like that in ASMR format, I can do that as well. I just kind of want to gauge what a lot of you are interested in. If it's just true crime, it's just true crime. That's absolutely fine. If there's enough interest in this, I'll definitely keep making them. I like making them. But I also don't want to invest a lot of time, because similar to true crime, you have to do some research on these. I don't want to invest a lot of time if no one's going to watch them. So let me know what you think, if you're interested in more like this in the future. And I will see